Hello! So today I made almond cupcakes with a French buttercream frosting. And what I want to do today is explain to you the difference between baking powder and baking soda and the instances in which you would use those two, and also explain a little bit of the science of emulsions and emulsifiers. And I'm going to start off by reading you my cupcake recipe, and what it calls for: 3/4 cup of butter, 1½ cup of sugar, 2 eggs, 1½ teaspoon of almond extract, 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla, 2½ teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2½ cups of flour, and 1 1/4 cup of milk. And so before I go and diving into my recipe, I'm going to explain to you the differences and also how baking powder and baking soda are kind of the same. They're both leveling agents, and all chemical leveling agents react under certain acidic or basic conditions which result in the product of carbon dioxide. I'll start off with our baking powder here. And so baking powder contains baking soda, but it also contains another compound, and it's going to be a solid crystal that reacts with either a low pH or heat. And that crystal is usually tartaric acid mixed with cornstarch, and that cornstarch acts as an initial moisture barrier. Now, if you can read, I don't know if I can get too close, this is a double-acting baking powder, and this refers to the baking powder's carbon dioxide released during the mixing and during the heating process. So not all baking powders are double-acting. Mine just happens to be double-acting. I couldn't find a non-double-acting in there. But it refers to bakery products that will not be used immediately, and that's like if you're going to put crepe batter in your refrigerator overnight and then bake it the next day. So that's what a baking powder is made out of. To explain baking soda is just sodium bicarbonate, and it needs an environment of pH with a pH of 6 or lower to actually produce carbon dioxide. So since our recipe did not call for anything that was acidic, we must use the baking powder. If we were to use the baking soda, the pH wouldn't be low enough to actually produce the carbon dioxide, and it would leave you with a cupcake that was probably about half the size and dense. So overall, you can replace baking soda with baking powder, but not baking powder with baking soda. And I hope that kind of clarifies that up for you. I'm going to move on to my buttercream frosting. It's a French buttercream frosting, and when you're making a buttercream, you are making an emulsion. Before I go into emulsions, I just want to read off to you my recipe for this that I used. I used 1 cup of unsalted butter, 2/3 cup of white sugar, 3 tablespoons of water, 5 large egg yolks, a pinch of salt, and a teaspoon of vanilla. Alright, so an emulsion is small droplets of one liquid suspended in another liquid. And it is identified by 2 phases: the continuous phase, and this is the phase in which the dispersed phase sits in, and then the dispersed phase known as the droplet suspended phase. And this is when a liquid is forced into small droplets and mechanically forced to live in the continuous phase. And in my recipe, I believe it is an oil and water emulsion. And just as a review, water is polar and oil is nonpolar or hydrophobic and does not like water. Thus, it does not allow for mixing of the two, and that creates your emulsion. So to make sure that our buttercream doesn't separate and we don't have runny, nasty icing, we need an emulsifier. And an emulsifier is added into that emulsion to stabilize the emulsion and prevent it from separating into its polar and nonpolar parts, aka water and oil separating. And in other words, it's a substance that stabilizes a mixture of 2 inadmissible substances. In my recipe, we have 5 egg yolks, which are going to act as our emulsifiers. And so those egg yolks contain approximately 5% lecithin, and lecithin is a hybrid fat water mediator. And the egg yolks are mainly made up of water, and it's surrounded in this water are proteins, lipids, and phospholipids, and those phospholipids are what are your lecithin. So when I add my egg yolks into my buttercream recipe, it is going to allow that oil and water to mix together, and so that's going to allow, so that way we don't have frosting that separates and it's runny. It might taste okay, but it's not a good consistency, and you wouldn't want to present that to your guests. So I hope that kind of clarifies the difference between baking powder and baking soda, and also goes a little bit of the science of emulsions and emulsifiers. I don't think I've mentioned R2D2 in the corner. He's actually a bunch of different measuring cups. I got him off of thinkgeek.com, and he's pretty cool. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I'm going to enjoy eating a lot of cupcakes, so thank you!